Hi everyone. As always, it's Floyd Runyard here. Thank you for joining us on Engineers. Today, in this episode, we're joined by Ezra Friedman, who is VP of Ventures with Klaviyo. Now, for those of you who don't know, Klaviyo are a leading player in marketing automation with a platform designed to automate and optimize their customers' marketing campaigns. To date, they've raised over 700 million in funding, and they've grown from around 100 people to, in the last 5 years, over 1,500. So they've been on some huge growth trajectory in recent years. Today, we're going to be talking around a range of topics, including scaling data science teams at high pace, how interdisciplinary teams maintain productive relationships through hypergrowth, and how to separate the noise around AI and data science these days. Firstly, Ezra, thank you very much for joining us on this episode today. It's a privilege to welcome you. But let's kick off with an intro to you, your background, your journey with Klaviyo, and maybe you can give us a bit more insight into your recent role as VP of Ventures and how you're impacting the core products of the business as well.
Yeah, thank you, Lloyd. Nice to get to do this with you. We met once before and enjoyed speaking with you off the camera. So looking forward to speaking today. Yeah, so I guess my background, I studied mathematics or maths, as you call it, and but always into developing software. And so my whole career has been around building software. And uh, I'll fast forward to joining Klaviyo about 5 years ago. And uh, Klaviyo CEO, Andrew Bielecki, wanted to sort of make data science not just something they something they practiced just as part of their existence and part of their you software, but he wanted a real group that was dedicated to data science. So up until then, I think Klaviyo was doing a lot of interesting things with data. Customers thought of us as a data science focused company, but it was in hyper growth mode, doubling every year, and so a lot of the engineering attention was building features that customers were asking for, scaling systems, and any time when a company's growing at that rate, you sort of need to invent new ways of doing things. Like every year, you come up with something, maybe it lasts for a few years, but then you need a new solution. So a lot of the attention and challenging problems fall into that category. So I joined actually along with someone I'd been working with. We had started a company together previously, Eric Silberstein, and we uh, set out on building a data science practice in the company. And I think we're going to talk some about that, some of the later topics, but in summary, did that for 4 years. Hired, I think around maybe 50 or 60 folks doing sort of at the cross section of engineering, data science, and product. And and then about a year ago, started in my new role as VP of Ventures. So Ventures is uh, a a group that we're looking at sort of innovation and trying things that maybe wouldn't be totally on the roadmap, maybe aren't even maybe they're a little bit peripheral to what we're doing as a company today, um, or maybe uh, some of our work is in different verticals. So our primary vertical is e-commerce, but we also have customers that are non-e-commerce. So it's a bit of a broad area. My focus at the moment is on sort of building tools for developers. Klaviyo, as we've matured, uh, we have a lot of companies that are building solutions that and use Klaviyo, and it's a big part of our sort of growth strategy is engaging our developers. So we've done a lot of work on improving our APIs, and my I have a ventures team that's working on building tools so you can more effectively build software on top of Klaviyo.
Okay, fine. So you're doing the kind of from a high level, you're dealing with a lot more of the newer innovation, maybe at times putting your neck on the line with what to implement and how best to implement it, right?
Yes,
Risky business.
yes, it is. But it's and Klaviyo is a company where I have memories from my earliest days, like when if you try something and you give it your all and it doesn't go right, like it's really the type of company that's supportive and says, all right, like what can we learn from this mistake? Or even when there were, system outages, it's not like a blame culture. It's very much uh right. What can we learn? And uh like let's try things.
Yeah, sure. And I think it's almost romantic when we first met and you told me the story and kind of what that title means. Um, I can't think of a better person, of course, to be taking on that role because of how early on in the journey for Klaviyo you joined, and the fact that, of course, you joined in a very technical capacity. You've obviously seen the challenges that a lot of the teams that you're supporting are going to be going through much of the time. So I think long may it continue, and I'm sure you bring huge value in that role as well, no doubt. Um,
I appreciate the vote of confidence.
Talk to us now about a bit more about Klaviyo's offering and what makes Klaviyo so compelling. I think the growth trajectory and the funding from the outside makes it quite obvious that what you've got going is really unique and quite powerful. But talk to us about really what makes the business special in what you do.
Yeah, and one thing about that funding, I'd say not typical sort of venture funding in that it's powering different ways that we're growing, but the company, largely it's just really been organic growth, and not like burning tons of venture cash to uh, for this 1 in a million shot. It's the company's had you know customers and low churn rate and high growth the whole time I've
That's
been here.
good.
Um, so Klaviyo, as you mentioned, it's a marketing automation uh, platform, which is sort of a broad category. We sort of want to empower the type of communication with your customers that you may have had in a more traditional bricks and mortar type environment, like the one-on-one personal communications, but to do that at scale. So we think of, we're almost helping the brands and their, messaging and uh, their image and helping you communicate that at scale to whether you have tens of customers or millions of customers. And to do that, uh, we're very, you know, we're believers that if you bring a lot of data into the Klaviyo database, into the system, you can do really interesting things with regards to segmentation and analytics and personalization. So I think, it's one of the hardest technical problems that uh, I think our CEO sort of insisted on early on, and we've continued to uh, manage and again had to invent different things to deal with and spend a lot of money, in terms of compute and storage. But we encourage our customers to bring uh, all different data sources into Klaviyo. So we have hundreds of different integrations. We have these APIs that I mentioned where you can sort of send whatever you want. Our customers put a snippet on their website and send in data from their website. So it really helps you get this full picture of your customer. Uh, the basics are like, okay, what have they bought from you in the past, but also things like their engagement sort of patterns with your messaging, their engagement patterns on your website. If you choose to integrate with, say, a support system, like that can be really interesting. Have they opened any support tickets? Uh, have they given it put any reviews, written reviews on your product? So we encourage you to bring in all this data, and we have all sorts of data science tools that are sort of sit on top of that and help you understand the data. And then we have all sorts of automations where you can sort of omni-channel messaging, and it's a very effective software, and our customers, like, there's real ROI. When they turn on Klaviyo and use it the way it's designed, uh, it's like it can be game changing for
Sure. And
customers.
so it's obviously it can auto extract certain data depending on how the customer's plugging Klaviyo in, right? So like you mentioned, if it's customer behavior or orders via an e-commerce site, for example, then because I know a lot of automation platforms that they're a lot more manual, right? So it sounds like Klaviyo actually gives you beyond that automation tool or tools, also acts, I guess, like an analytics platform, right? Where
Yep.
it's giving you it's being fed data and it's showing you what that behavior looks like and how it can optimize the interaction, which I think probably sets it apart from a lot of competitors, I would imagine. But that sounds super interesting. And do you, in terms of customer base, do you feel like it's most powerful within a particular sector or customer type, or is it really quite dynamic in terms of who might use it and how it can perform?
Yeah. So no, I think I did mention our sort of primary vertical is e-commerce, and I
Yeah.
think there's certain pieces of the software that are are probably mostly geared towards businesses that get orders. But from when I started and started meeting with customers, you do meet all types of businesses that are effectively using this software. We've done a push recently into uh, hospitality,
Okay.
uh, right? And I think that's an example where I think it started to happen where some maybe tech-enabled brands like, I don't know, Chipotle or Sweetgreen, or like some companies are paying attention to that. But I've always thought, if I go to this restaurant, even a local restaurant, and maybe I've ordered a certain dish in the past, or maybe it's clear that I'm vegetarian. Like, wouldn't it be nice if they could send out a campaign that's like, oh, we have a new menu item. Do you want to come try it out? And here's maybe a discount. So I think there's a lot of lost opportunity uh, for that type of customer relationship in hospitality. We also have integrations, and the way we're approaching these largely is by adding to that suite of integration. So
Sure.
integrating with platforms like Toast or other uh, uh, restaurant platforms, but we're also have set up a number of wellness uh, integrations. So if you're running a yoga studio, is a great example. But we believe, what about things like your a relationship with a physician, or education? Uh, that's the tool is really, you're in any of those industries, you're going to want to be communicating with your customers or clients or students in a personal way, and Klaviyo can do that. And then in terms of the size of business, we probably we all types of businesses, like brands that are global, huge businesses, again, with many millions of customers can sign on for Klaviyo, which is amazing. But you can also sign on for a free plan with you know 20 customers, or even really as you're just starting out. So we want to sort of be able to grow with you, and a lot of work has gone into you know making sure we can support even the largest brands. And I think that's uh, it can be a little bit disruptive to some of the big enterprise players who are used to, I don't know, selling these very complicated contracts with all sorts of add-ons and multi-year terms and all that, and professional services and all this. And like, no, we're still, it's month to month. We don't want to hold you against your, if you're
That's
not happy as a
interesting.
customer.
So it's a floating license that you got. The model is floating, right? So
Yeah.
it's month to month. You can back out whenever you want. You can join whenever you want. Okay.
Yeah. And I think, and part of it is right, we believe we have a great product, and I think right our churn rates sort of indicate that. But also, right, if you want to go somewhere else, we don't want to be in the way of you uh, doing what you think is right for your business.
That's confidence in the product, and I guess also an ethical mindset as to how you want to do business as well. I think rather let the customer go than have a majority of the year with the customer complaining that it's not right for them, but they're tied in, right? So I think
Exactly.
it's
And
it's certainly
we actually have like a Slack channel for boomerangs. Uh,
okay.
so we have like, there's not it's not that uncommon, if someone does decide to go to another system, that maybe a year later they come back, and we welcome them back. We don't hold it against them for trying something else, and hopefully we can learn maybe what if there are things that they got that they wish they had in Klaviyo, maybe we can address.
Sure. Understood. Nice. And now maybe kind of set the scene for our listeners, our viewers, on what Klaviyo was like as a business when you joined 5 years ago. Because I think, especially when we think about the maturity of the data science department, and I know you touched on this briefly in the intro, but I think it's it's really interesting to understand when you go from not just from a commercial perspective to go from essentially a small company to grow to the size that you have today, a huge, almost corporate. Um, the especially when you think about data science function um, and how the processes work and how you scale a function. Talk to us about what that looked like then versus kind of what you and your colleagues have managed to build to what it looks like today.
Sure. Yeah. No. And so when I joined around 100 people, um, based in Boston, and this is pre-COVID in terms of like the remote world.
Everyone was on site. It was
Everyone
always
was on
busy in the
site.
office. Yeah.
I mean, I would like, if I had a doctor's appointment, I would come to the office, do work, like go to the doctor's appointment, come back, and nowadays it feels like, wow,
Yeah.
who does that?
I've got the doctor, so I have the day off, or I'll work from home. Yeah.
Right, right. Or I also have this memory of one of one of the early sort of meetings, interviews. Um, it was big snowstorm in Boston, and I'm thinking like, okay, are they gonna, is anyone gonna be at the office? Like, is this thing gonna be called off? And I didn't hear anything, so I came in on the subway and boots, like really like deep snow, and I get into the office, and it was like packed with people. It was almost like you wouldn't even know that it was
It
anything
just
that
wasn't an option to work from home.
yeah,
No, not
and
at all.
frankly, people, that was part of the culture and part of the excitement of being there. Um, and right, that's another topic maybe for another podcast, just about sort of remote work in general and sort of where we're landing on hybrid work. But we were never, even back then there were companies that were like remote companies, but that was
It
not
wasn't
us.
certainly wasn't the norm, right? And I
No,
think certainly it is a whole nother topic, but certainly if it wasn't the norm from a company perspective, it certainly wasn't expected from an employee perspective. I think it was very much a privilege, right? Even to get the odd day working from home. So I think for the most part, anyway. So we've definitely changed with the times, and I guess that is an important factor for certainly the maturity of your teams and how it's functioned, especially when you think about internationalizing the organization, the product.
yeah,
um, Everyone works in weird and wonderful ways. But yeah, you carry on.
yeah. So but I think very much an environment where you know a lot of people solving hard problems. A number of there were more fires, I'd say, back then than there are today. As we've matured, we've sort of developed systems that are just able, like, and by fires I mean, a system's having trouble or right, just things that need
Very
addressing
reactive.
or
Yeah,
management.
yeah, for sure.
Um, but it's a very people would wear many many hats, and so when I joined, uh, I one of the first things that Eric and I said, we said before we hired anyone, we wanted to like get our hands dirty and uh, build something into the product. And we set a pretty ambitious goal. Like we wanted to do that within 1 quarter. We wanted to like identify something in data science, like build it and deliver it. And with the thinking, this would be a way to meet different people in the company, to ideally meet with customers. Like we're very, you hear customer first probably all the time, but like, we, uh, when I joined, we went as far as every new engineering employee had to spend a week or something like a week on support rotations. So like
Okay.
on chat, working directly with our customers, solving problems, which it was amazing and humbling, and it makes you, really. Um, it's just impressive how our support people, like the types of problems they can solve day in and day out. Now, also maybe not the always the best experience for the customer because you have like people who aren't trained in this area and who don't have as much. They're also maybe newer employees. So as we've matured, that particular practice is no longer. But I do think it demonstrates sort of right how much we want even engineers who in some companies are just like behind the computer and never talk to a customer. Uh, we wanted to really put everyone on the front line.
Sure.
But so right, build this feature, and actually the first feature we worked on was this a customer lifetime value model, and what we saw was uh, when you mentioned with integrations, we can bring in a lot of even historical data when you sign on to Klaviyo. So you could be your first day on the Klaviyo platform, and if you integrate with Shopify or BigCommerce or Magento or one of the whatever e-commerce platform you're using, we like can immediately bring in the entire history of your store, like every customer, every order, every return, every like you name it. And that's pretty, there's something very interesting there. Like, and we can start to do analytics. And so uh, what we would do is sort of take this data, run it through uh, a sort of, we worked off of like a somewhat standard but published customer lifetime value model, made some modifications to it based on sort of behavior we were seeing, among our customer base, and then would deploy this model. And this would be sort of specifically trained on your business's data.
Okay.
Um, and that's an important sort of piece there because, right, we sort of recognize that even though these businesses are all or largely e-commerce, they're very there's it's not like a homogenous group. Some are subscription businesses, some are selling B2B, some are like, you know, maybe you sell a high-end mattress or something. And so it's you're not repeating your order, you're not buying a mattress every 2 months, whereas if you're buying shampoo, it's a different story. So like
Yeah.
the behavior of the customers is completely different. So we wanted to sort of take that into account. And also there's like the privacy issue of, you know, your relationship with your customer, and you're entrusting Klaviyo with your business's data. And we take that responsibility pretty seriously. And right, we don't want to introduce any way that, even indirectly, that data could be exposed to someone, that you didn't intend it to be exposed to.
Sure.
Uh, so, right, pretty neat that when this feature went live, you could right sign up for Klaviyo. Maybe the historical sync would take, I don't, depending on the size of your business, say minutes to a day. And once that data was there, we could train this model, and you could predict things like, spend over time on both like an aggregate level and individual profile level. And then you can do things like, I want to identify customers who, and this is sort of the segmentation piece, who um, have a likelihood to spend more than $100 in the next year. And maybe send some certain messaging to that segment, or um, customers who have likely churned, with this idea of like probability of churn. So, and I want to send a certain type of message to them to try to win. That's like we call it win back campaign.
Okay.
So yeah, so that was the first thing we did, and I think we our first hire actually is a woman who's still with Klaviyo and has sort of really grown in her role. Someone who's really strong in the math and statistics side of things, MIT trained, genius. But like, so Eric and I think I know we're more engineering. Like we had been all like, we know product and building systems, and math, but not, like we started to realize, like we all have gaps in our skill sets. And so
Oh, for sure.
our first thing was like, let's hire to fill those gaps. And so that was the first hire, and we continued to hire. I think initially we thought we wanted people who were not just going to sort of produce reports, but really like build product, because Klaviyo is a product company, and that's sort of how we measure, at least back then. That's how we measured velocity and output. And you'd say, "Hey, I shipped. Like, what did you ship? I shipped this, or I shipped that." And
Yeah. Need to
if you're
stay
like,
fresh, right? I think with the improvements and the rollouts, and yeah, absolutely.
yeah, but you're not. So I think at some company, like we like to distinguish ourselves. Just sort of, we call it like full stack data science. Like we don't just do the math and modeling, but we also build the product, and we'll build the back end, we'll build the front end, and we'll talk to the customers. Like we'll do it all. And I think it worked in that we were able to build a lot of stuff, and we hired really smart people who were able to ramp up in ways that they probably, didn't imagine. We had people who were like, I'm building or something in React. Like I never even heard of that before I got to Klaviyo, so right. It was a very like exciting time. And I think for a lot of people, it was, I like to think, great for their career and their skill sets. And we were able to get all these things done. But, the reality is no one's going to be most strong in any sort of discipline. And we would when we'd interview people, we'd look at people on like uh, three parts of a triangle. So it's like your data science skills, so math, statistics, and we had different types of screenings to like probability, like assess that sort of thing. Then software engineering. So like everyone would have to do some of our coding exercises, and then also product. So like we wanted people again who could put themselves in the shoes of a customer, or talk to a customer. So I think in the beginning we were looking for people who like nailed it on all three of those. That quickly realized like maybe we can't do that. But so then we were like, okay, well if they are really strong in one, but like strong in two, and maybe interested in the third, and so that was part of the refining, and that worked for a while. And I think as the team matured, a couple of things happened. One is, because we were doing a lot of software engineering, and it made sense for us to be like very closely aligned with the engineering department, because sort of by design we were off on the side. And our CEO, again, AB, was like, there'll be some conflict, but like conflict's okay. And you're going to be, software engineers can be kind of territorial, and people are going to be like, hey, what is this data science team, and what are they doing with our code, and they're going to mess things up. And so there was definitely some,
Some teething
pain.
issues.
What's that?
Some teething problems. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was like, and then I'd sort of go to AB and say, hey, like what? And he's like, yeah, good. That's fine. Like that means it's going right. Like, right. It shouldn't just be comfortable.
Sure.
Um, but as we matured, it made sense to like the people who are really doing engineering to be, for example, at all the engineering all hands meetings and to be helping design the processes that engineering, that they were then going to follow. And
Yeah,
so we moved the data science team sort of into the umbrella of engineering. That was like
right.
one big step. And then actually more recently, as it's matured, we have sort of in a way broken it off again, but the we have like a number of the people from who were part of the data science team who were doing a lot of great software engineering and primarily software engineering are now like, we even changed some people's titles. There have no layoffs on this, but move people who are their career is going to be more in software engineering, and then our data science team is doing a lot of data science in maybe in a little bit more traditional way, like supporting the business. So we have data scientists who are working with our finance team on, Klaviyo's own models. We have data science who are working with our different product teams and supporting um, research and AI features uh, and all sorts of things like that. So that's sort of the general evolution.
Sort of fully integrated rather than being nomads that are just kind of plugging away in the corner, right? Which I think it's so interesting that that's still the case for for many businesses. I think when you talk about data science teams, it's even when there's a substantial software team, quite often there's such a segmentation between them,
Yeah.
and not a huge amount of synergy. And I guess it does come down to largely what the business is doing, the product that you're building. Does it make sense to be fully integrated with engineering, or is it going to be a case of treading on one another's toes? I don't think there's a one size fits all, but it's interesting, especially when you talk around types of people that you would target as well when you first started out. That's really interesting, and I think naturally in a startup scale up, you do want people that can wear almost every hat, right? But I think as you get bigger, you realise that maybe that's not feasible.
Yeah.
So do you feel that these days when it comes to hiring and building your teams, maybe because of the size, but maybe because of that evolution, um, you're able to be more specific in, okay, we know we're going to hire someone that's got significant gaps in particular areas, but we know that we need a real speciality in one or two areas, for example. So does that tend to be the case now rather than trying to find someone who can kind of do a bit of everything?
Yes, and I'll give you one great one. Makes me think of this fact, which is for a long time we would hire the person, and then like when they would join or right before they would join, we'd be like, oh, like what are they going to do? Like, oh, what team? Like, what are they going to work on? And we'd sort of scramble to like, so we'd really hire the person, and they would have no idea. They'd know they were joining Klaviyo, maybe their title, but like no real idea what they were going to work on. And now I laugh because right now it's very much, a specific hiring manager. Like we still interview people, like they'll meet different, like we might identify a specific hiring manager that looks good, but we might change, but by the time they're hired, it's quite clear like what team they're going to be working on. And by team, I don't just mean data science team. Like, we have actually a team staffed here in London, the deliverability insights team. So this is a team that's specifically looking at a really interesting data problem, which is broadly called deliverability, which for email is, sort of do my messages go to the spam box or not is sort of the most
Right.
basic
Okay.
way to say it. And um, but anyway, so right, we just pointing out how specific, you know, um, some of the teams, or really all the teams have got.
Yeah. So it's not just about identifying specific skills when you hire them. You're a lot better now at actually specifying exactly where they're going to work and what they're working on. And I'm assuming because of the size of the team now, it's quite easy for your team to pivot between projects or business areas if they needed to. Um, and I think that also makes for a good culture, right? And I think from a retention perspective, makes life a lot easier if you've got if there's a very clear picture on where you sit and you want to pivot to a different team. or
Yeah.
different interest, that must make life easier for you as well to have that structure. Albeit maybe not always as fun as the days of kind of. I have an image now of you just being sat like in a dingy office somewhere, and you're just all plugging away at doing what you need to do.
Yeah.
Maybe it wasn't so bad, but
Yeah.
that's the image I have in my head.
Yeah. The only part that's not right is the dingy, like, and this is something where our CEO, you know, just when I first met him, just like such confidence about the trajectory of the bit that the business would keep growing. And I sort of discounted a little bit, like, come on, like, every like, if you're raising money, you have to say that. Like, um,
You felt it was a bit over optimistic.
yeah, I was like, come on, like, we're not gonna hit that number. And similarly, it was actually like a really nice office. It was completely packed full because we had grown so much, but like it was sort of class A downtown Boston office space. I had started a company, uh, and our part of our approach was don't overspend on things like office spaces. So we had some like pretty, even when we were doing pretty well as a business, like we had some pretty crappy spaces. I had some stories that like one was broken into overnight, like just weird,
God.
not great.
So
But
there's nothing like that. You were certainly treated well even in the early days,
yeah,
right?
I was like, wow, look at this. This is like there's a front someone at the door and catered lunches, and we or not every day, but it's like but part of it was he sort of knew right the amount we would spend on that. It's like sort of irrelevant given sort of where we were heading as a company. I mean, he want like and so we hit those milestones, or we beat the ones that he had given me that I couldn't believe, and that sort of continued to happen. So you just sort of have to believe him now.
Yeah, long may it continue. Yeah.
And we
Exactly that.
we did things like um, one year after Black Friday, Cyber Monday is like we call it, it's like the Super Bowl of e-commerce. These are two. I'm giving two very American things, but this is our Black Friday. I know is here, and I know people watch the Super Bowl. So it after that's done, there's a lot of work prepping for it. Actually, in this office here, I have like there's a countdown clock counting down the number of days until the next Black Friday. I think it's 111 when I walked in this morning. But when it's over, there's a big sort of, if things went well, big relief. And so there was a tradition where we would do something with the whole company. And one year we um, chartered a plane to go from Boston down to Miami, which is not very close. It's like a 3-hour flight, and to go watch the New England Patriots American football team play the Dolphins.
Look at that.
And it was like, and I remember feeling again, like, are we, why are
What's
we
going
spending
on?
all this money?
Yeah.
But it was amazing, and it was the most fun day, and it was bonding, and we still, right, people still, I'm telling a story about it right now. So
Still announced. It's core
um,
memory, isn't it? I'd like
Eric,
to see you charter enough planes to get everyone down there these days, though. I think those days are gone, aren't they? I think I
yeah,
think finding a venue for you all would
that's
be
hard
hard
enough.
enough. When we think about the engineering and the kind of data challenges that your departments have, and certainly that you've experienced over the last 5 years or so, um, what would you say are some of the kind of biggest challenges that you've faced, both as a business growing, but also technically?
Yeah. Um, right. So, yeah, let's talk a little bit about the technical side. Um, as I mentioned, this is a business that, for many years was doubling or more every year. And that's exponential growth. And that means you end up with really big numbers. And so, um, there are a lot of challenges because when you're, and it's part of the hard parts of being a successful company is that you have to deal with growth. And the good parts are you have a healthy business, you have revenue, you can hire more people, and all of that. But it is challenging. So, even things like that initial model, the customer lifetime value model I was telling you about, we had to think about okay, can we train? First of all, like, let's talk about training. So if a customer has a million, if one of our customers has a million of their customers, um, and maybe they've been in business for 4 years, uh, how many orders is that over time? And like, right, can we train uh, the model in a reasonable amount of time? And then there's also the question of what's a reasonable amount of time. You also have to think about cost uh, a little bit. And actually, this is another way I think it's been good for Klaviyo, but like we haven't really focused on cost of compute. We're starting to now as we mature because we can, and because like the potential benefits are so great, and there's like an environmental component to it too. Like, right, it's not just cost but also energy. And but right, for years it was more about performance uh, rather than costs. But so that like one side is on the training, and depending on the model, there's different techniques you can do, like sampling, and there's statistically sound ways to uh, use less data to get the same results, and so we would explore things like that. Um, and but then there's also on the predict side, what are the expectations of the customer when, for example, they build a segment, um, how long can that take uh, to appear, and what's reasonable? And that's something where, actually, as recently as a few months ago, we did our like another overhaul of that whole system, like a reinvention of that system, in order to make it um, faster for even our largest customers. And that was one area where we always had kind of an edge over our competitors, because I don't know, like really strong engineers who came up with really great ways of doing it. But as you grow and as our customers grow, these things become, you know, generally can become slower. And how do you get around that? So in data science, right, these problems are absolutely there. So thinking about, again, ways to like cache different data, or ways to maybe simplify the problem a little, or um, just be able to accommodate that kind of scale.
Yeah, and
So
I guess the scale that you've gone to as well, with over 100,000 customers, and when you go from a smaller business with a smaller pool, I guess it's easier to have a mentality of, well, if a customer needs a change to how the platform's performing for them, then we'll try and implement that. Maybe give them quite a bespoke service in that respect. When you get to a size where you maybe have 100,000 customers, you don't have capacity for every customer to be coming to you and saying, can you just tweak this, and then you go back. So I guess it's a really interesting topic and challenge, I imagine, to make things, like you say, simplify it so that it's scalable and going to perform where you want it to for a majority of your customers, but also give your customers confidence that if there are problems, you can adjust and change things and try and suit them, right? So striking that balance between what's feasible to be flexible on versus what you need to kind of stand your ground on, and must be a real challenge from an engineering perspective.
yeah, and we've sort of always been sort of, we're a software as a service business. We're not a, like, right, some of these enterprise models where if you have big enough check, they'll be like, oh yeah, we'll set up a whole other Klaviyo just for you, and or in your data center, or all these things. And like, those are tempting. It's tempting to do, especially when you're a younger company, and you know that could like triple your revenue with one new deal. But we, by design, never did that. And so like we have one Klaviyo, and the same, our biggest customers get like sort of the same architecture and technology stack as our smallest customers. And actually, there was one customer who was no longer with us, which is probably okay, and I won't name them. But when I joined, they were by far our largest customer. And in some ways, you don't want that as a software as a service business, because I have like a whale essentially, because if you count on them too much for revenue, then what happens when they go away? And they can be they can have different expectations than the rest of your customers. But this company, which I will not name, had just explosive growth. It was also, for me, it was like a view into what can happen. Like my previous company was in the world of clinical trials, uh, working with pharma companies. And like, the data, they call it big data, but it's not really big data. Once I saw
Not that
this, like,
big. Yeah.
yeah, this like viral growth uh, retailer. But the positive side of it was it really forced us to like solve some of those growth problems ahead of when we would have had to.
Mm.
So like all the customers would benefit from it. But I mean, if you mention this like to some of the old guard at Klaviyo, like they'll if you mention the name, they'll just have these memories of having to scale systems um, to accommodate. So it wasn't that the customer was asking for like special services; they just wanted the thing to work,
Yeah.
understandably, and it was kind of a blessing in disguise because it gave us some breathing room.
Yeah, sure, I can imagine, and I guess when you explode to data that maybe you haven't been prepared for having to, in terms of size, having to manage. I guess it's definitely food for thought and learning, right? Like you say, the customer may not be with you now, but I think certainly learning on how to adapt, how to improve the product, how to react as well in those situations.
Mhm.
And I imagine to some degree accepting when actually some things just aren't possible. So rather than trying to say yes to everything.
Right.
Um, Now, talk to me about some of the challenges you've had when it comes to internationalization and the localization of your platform as well. Because, of course, headquartered in Boston, we've discussed in the past growth into London now, which is where you are today, and even further afield. Um,
Mhm.
Talk to us what internationalizing and localizing a product really means for you, and actually what that entails, and what that's probably going to entail for you moving forward.
Yeah. So the second office we opened was here in London, and that was sort of right before the pandemic. Um, uh, maybe close to a year before, but we started hiring up a team, and the reality is we already had a number of customers in Europe, and we wanted to be able to better serve them, and we also wanted to expand um, in the EMEA region, and so up until recently, sort of the teams that were based here are like sales, customer support, success, um, also something called solutions architecture, where we have like more technical uh, folks who will work with you on an implementation. Uh, a lot of we have like customer education in going on in French and in German and Spanish. So like like doing training in non-English languages, but the product is still the interface is entirely in English, and I think and some of it's probably just because of the pace we were growing. Like we have error messages that were written by engineers who like, were like probably not even in great written in very good English. Um, Now the product, like if you want to send messages in say Arabic or Hebrew, like a right to left language, like you can do that, but it's not it's not an optimized experience.
Yeah.
It's more of like you have to sort of know what you're doing to use it. So right, we have the international expansion, and that's going really, really well. Um, I think European markets, like we can go to meet with partners, and how quick it is to get places from London, but like in the Netherlands and in Belgium, like it's just we've developed this whole huge network. Actually, we just had a big Klaviyo London conference. There were like 700 customers and partners who came
Wow.
to
Okay.
London for this like full day event. Uh, so going great.
Much easier to stay connected, right, than compared to the US. Like you were saying earlier, I think probably to get from Boston to Miami, I mean, you can get halfway across Europe in the same time, right? So
Yeah,
it's crazy the scale.
the scale is crazy, and sort of like and then the cultural, it's there, and I've really enjoyed being based here. And I think it's we just have a very nice sort of and expanding network of partners and customers in Europe who I think, or I know, appreciate our having this physical presence here and people here and time zone and all of that. And actually, the more recent expansion in that way is into APAC. We have a Sydney office
Okay.
that's sort of following, a similar model to what we did here. But when I came a year ago, part of the idea was let's look into doing software engineering out of our London office, because up until then, all the software engineering was in the U.S. before COVID, all in Boston. Um, now more spread out in the U.S., but still largely like the vast majority in Boston. And so we're building teams here. We now have 11 hired. Most of them have already started doing different, you know, sort of focused work like all of our engineering teams. But one of the teams is doing our SMS product, like international expansion. So we, in our omni-channel marketing, you can send messages, email, SMS, in-app push, and we're expanding to other channels. The SMS is kind of unique in that you're dealing with local carriers and local sort of guidelines in terms of like what's okay to send and how do you have to offer opt out and when is it okay to send. And
And that differs country to country, right? So I guess that's a huge consideration as to being aware of potential limitations on how your product runs and what you're doing. So, and that must be super tricky when you venture in. Again, when you think of Europe or even the US, I imagine state to state it changes. There's not necessarily a one size fits all. So I guess would you say that's the kind of number one challenge of kind of internationalizing the product per se?
yeah, in that particular case, and I think, in the US, it's, well, first of all, historically haven't been like maybe as focused on privacy as Europe, with things like GDPR. California started to do, have some things, but it's mostly sort of the same. No, at least with SMS, it's mostly the same within the country. But like no, in Europe, it varies a lot by country. And also the other difference is it's very common for a European e-commerce retailer to have customers in many different European countries, and that's not the case. In the U.S., generally, you're going to have U.S. Customer base, and so like our SMS product becomes much more compelling if you can actually send messages to all of your, if if it's, what about, or like in Scandinavia, like where it's very common to have a storefront in different Scandinavian countries, and like you want to be able to just send you don't want to have to think about that when you're sending messages to people. So that's a great one to be based here, because they can work with, this engineering team works a lot with our sales and success who are like know these customers, and I think I just have more awareness of the how things work in Europe. And so that's one. Another one is localizing the product. So things like the interface, things like how do we communicate error messages, but also how does the product differ depending what country you're in terms of things like different regulations uh, and practices. So that's a huge task, and that's being run out of here. And then we also and we have a third team. I mentioned this deliverability insights team that's operating here. So we're hiring. I think it's a really good. I think it's a great company and opportunity to sort of be part of a mature, growing software business, but also really like make your mark and be like part of one of the founding members of this like European based engineering team for Klaviyo. And there'll be some growing pains, like we're having to figure out some of the meeting, like how do we adjust the meeting schedules. So like there was an all hands meeting that was at a 2 p.m. Eastern, and that's 7 p.m. here. So like how do we fix that? So like right, adjusting some of the schedules. We actually just had a big engineering sort of, we called it a hub week in Boston, but we flew out the engineers from here to right, I think in person time is
Yeah,
going
it's
to be
super.
important.
Yeah, and saves the. I think if you're opening up in Australia as well, I think that pain is going to get all the more stronger, right? I think aligning the three.
Yeah, well, to be honest, no, we're not hiring engineers in Australia today, right? I think we want to be deliberate about this growth, and I think that that's a whole other set of challenges when you have uh, zero hours of overlap, versus here we have a few.
Sure, understood. And I think before we wrap up, I do want to. I wanted to cover on hiring a little because I think as we've discussed, Boston is where the headquarters is. I think in terms of scale, numbers, hiring volume, in the US, there's a huge amount of opportunity. And I think anyone, of course, that is watching this that's US based, or certainly Boston based, I'd certainly recommend to check it out because I think the volume of which the teams are hiring there, technical and non-technical, is on a massive scale. But talk to me about particularly London growth and anyone watching this that may be interested, may be open, especially that's coming from engineering or data science domain. Um, Talk to us about what type of skills you're really interested in seeing, what you would typically look for, what types of projects they might be typically working on.
Yeah, so no, we're looking for in software, like sort of strong software engineering uh, foundations. I think we're generally we're we don't have a list of specific technologies. I mean, there are certain technologies that we use as a company, but we believe and have seen time and again that someone who can write really good software in one language can write really good software in another language, and sure there's some ramp up, but that's better than someone who can write like okay software in the language that you happen to use. So, I think if you look at our job listings, we sort of, you'll see that, right, looking for um, software engineering expertise. I think, right, we want people who are interested in communicating with customers and aren't sort of put off by that. Someone who's comfortable with sort of, I think the growth that we have, means right, we're often sort of assessing how we do things and refining things and making changes. So it's right, it's not like a sort of very static role, or like you have to be open to okay, processes are going to change and maybe at a pace that might not be always totally comfortable, but that's
Roll your sleeves up and get moving.
yeah,
Yeah.
and like yeah, and also get involved. Like right, it's definitely a place where people can, if they see something that's not working, like you're going to be, and you decide to take it on and try to get consensus, like right, that's going to be celebrated, and that's not one where people are going to say you're still.
And do you look for a particular kind of background I assume it doesn't need to be industry specific, but are there particular backgrounds or, I guess, focus area specialisms that you think historically have worked really well that you're interested in, or are we talking you really are as relaxed as if you're just a solid engineer that loves working on difficult customer products, and you can interact well and get stuck in, then it's
Yeah.
an open book.
Well, I will say, for some reason, we have a lot of people who come from a physics background. I don't know exactly why that is, but actually, just yesterday, I don't know if you're following this room temperature superconductor story
Okay.
out of South Korea that's been in the news just very recently. But um, we were in a meeting and I brought it up, and then one of the other people were like, "Wait, but how does that? What does it really mean?" Like, and then one of the guys in the room was like, "All right, I guess I'll get on the whiteboard." And so he was like, he studied physics and proceeded to give us like a whole. I wish it was on this whiteboard, but like you know a
Layman's terms of
lecture on
exactly how it works,
how
and
it
yeah.
works, and then we start talking about MRI machines and how they work, and so no, right, like that kind of curiosity, and like that's definitely uh, sort of rewarded, and right, like I wouldn't be afraid that someone would see that and say, "What the? Why are they wasting time?" Like that has nothing to do with the work we're doing. And actually, I sent a picture of the whiteboard to our CEO. I was just like, I was like, I think you'll appreciate this because he actually also was physics. Like, yeah, oddly, there's a lot of physics people, but
Seems to be really
that's not a
common in that.
requirement.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
But certainly someone that's curious, someone that enjoys that, the fun of kind of learning and understanding different problems. And I think that's a good point that you make. And it's that mentality, right? Whether it's related to the work all the time or not, I think that curiosity to learn and understand how something works, it's always a good skill to have.
yeah.
I
Uh,
think.
on that, one quick thing is that one of our unique benefits as a company, to like an employee benefit, is our book reimbursement policy, and we will reimburse like any book that you want to buy. Um, you can submit for reimbursement, like,
Expensive.
and it's
Nice.
and then people are like, "Wait, you mean like a cookbook?" Or like, "Yep, like basically any if it can't be a rare text, you can't like buy a first edition, yeah, and with the intention of reselling it. But
Yeah.
if it's something you're interested in, like fiction, like I think right, a lot of companies say, "Oh, if you buy a book and it's directly related to what you do at work, like great,
Yeah,
we'll
then we'll,
support that." But no, we
yeah, yeah.
want to support your sort of overall curiosity. Um,
Yeah, that's really I've not heard of that before either. So I think that's a really and that probably speaks volumes for the culture as well. And I think anyone listening to that will no doubt their ears will perk up with the avid
yeah,
readers out there who can go to town in a bookstore and not have to worry about the cost of it for
yeah,
sure. But
it is great.
um, look, I really appreciate your time today, Ezra, and I think, as always, a massive thank you. Anyone tuning in, please feel free to like, share, comment. It always helps give exposure to the podcast and the episodes that we run. And I would say that if you are interested in the growth that Klaviyo have gone through in recent years, I think it's a really fascinating story with the growth trajectory that they've been on. I think culturally how, for me anyway, the impression is given of still very much being startup scale up with voices being heard, impact being able to be had. I think it would be good for you to reach out to Ezra directly, or certainly check out their careers page, which I'll share in the link below as well. But as I say, thank you very much, Ezra. It's been a pleasure. And for now, goodbye.
Thank you, Lloyd. It was fun.
Hey guys, thanks for watching this episode. Massively appreciate you listening and checking in with us. If you want to find out more about us and what we're doing, please check us out on social media. What we're trying to do at Engineers is build a community to drive knowledge sharing and experiences. On Twitter, we can be found Engineers.io. It's no underscore. We've also got a website which is engineers.io. These links will all be posted in the description. Any feedback and comments are massively appreciated. We're always looking to improve on where we can. Thanks, guys.